They called me a failure, but they didn't know I was already a millionaire. My name is Sophia Miller, and for years, my family thought I was the black sheep, the one who couldn't do anything right. They never believed in me, not when I was a kid, not when I was trying to make it on my own. I've been told so many times that I wouldn't amount to anything, that I'd never be successful, that I'd always be dependent on others. But what they didn't know is that I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving in silence, building something far bigger than they could ever imagine. It all started with a rejection, one that would eventually turn into the most powerful comeback of my life. Growing up, I always felt invisible in my family. My older brother, Ethan, was the golden child. He was the one who excelled in everything. He made straight A's, was captain of the soccer team, and had the charm that made everyone love him. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, shy one. I was never the center of attention, never the one my parents raved about at family gatherings. Instead, I was always the one who got lost in the background. When I graduated high school, I had no big celebrations, no applause. I didn't get the same recognition Ethan did. While he got a brand new car for his graduation, I received nothing. No congratulations, no recognition of my hard work. It was like I was just there. It wasn't until I applied to college that things really started to get tough. I was determined to go to the University of California, but when it came time to talk finances, my parents flat out told me they couldn't afford it. Ethan, however, had a full ride to Stanford. They couldn't possibly help me too. I had to figure it out on my own. My parents didn't seem to understand that I was just as capable as Ethan. They didn't believe in me, didn't see that I was just as deserving of their support. But that was the thing. I wasn't looking for their approval anymore. I was determined to prove them wrong. I started working 2 jobs, barely getting by, but I kept my head down and pushed through. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I was willing to fight for what I wanted. During college, I studied business and finance, something that came naturally to me. I loved numbers. I loved the way the market moved, how every decision had an impact. While other students partied and enjoyed their college years, I spent every free minute I had reading books on investments and stocks. I invested the little money I had, learning as I went. My first real win came during my second year of college, when I managed to turn a small $500 investment into $7,000. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me believe I could actually do this. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. I wanted to show them that I could succeed on my own, that I didn't need their help or validation. The more I learned, the more I invested, and soon I was pulling in serious profits. By the time I graduated, I had built up a modest portfolio worth a few $100,000. I didn't tell my family. I knew they'd just think it was luck. But I wasn't done yet. I kept pushing, kept learning. I took a job at a small financial firm right after graduation, and within 3 years, I had worked my way up to become a financial analyst, then a senior analyst, and eventually, I landed a position as the head of finance at a major investment firm. But the real twist came a few years after that. You see, my parents had no idea that the small amount of money they'd turned their backs on me for had multiplied into something far greater. I had no intention of telling them, no intention of seeking their approval. But one day, out of nowhere, I got a call from my mother. "Sophia," she said, her voice shaking, "we're in trouble. We need your help." My parents had gotten into a financial mess. Their business had failed, and they were facing bankruptcy. Their house was on the line, their assets frozen. They needed $9 million to save themselves. I couldn't help but smile. It was the moment I had waited for. My time to take control. I knew exactly what they needed, but I didn't give them an answer right away. Instead, I asked them to meet me for dinner. When we sat down together at that fancy restaurant, they didn't recognize the person I had become. The quiet, shy girl they had dismissed was now the one holding all the cards. I looked them in the eyes and said, "I can help you. I've got the $9 million you need to save your business and your home. My mother's face turned pale. My father's hands trembled. They had no idea. They didn't know that the same girl they had called a failure was the one who now controlled everything they had once taken for granted. I didn't give them the money right away. I made them sweat. I let them feel the weight of their past mistakes, the years of dismissing me, the years of making me feel worthless. But when the time came, I wrote them a check for $9 million. And I handed it over with one simple instruction: you'll repay me, but on my terms. They were stunned. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. I could tell they were regretting every time they had ever told me I wasn't good enough, every time they had looked past me for my brother. But it was too late. They had underestimated me for far too long, and now they were at my mercy. This wasn't just about the money. It was about showing them that I didn't need their approval to succeed. I had built this success on my own, and now I was in control. They had no choice but to accept it. They had to bow to the person they once called a failure. In the end, they were grateful. They couldn't admit it outright, but I could see it in their eyes. They finally saw me, the way I had always wanted them to. But by then, I no longer cared about their validation. I had already won. And I knew that the future was mine to shape. The dinner table was set with fine china, the soft clink of glasses and utensils filling the room. Sophia sat across from her parents, a slight smile on her lips, watching them squirm in their seats. They had no idea what was coming. The tension in the air was thick, almost palpable. Her father, Gerald, nervously adjusted his tie, his eyes flickering to her every now and then, though he couldn't meet her gaze for more than a second. Her mother, Diane, had a forced smile plastered on her face, as if pretending that everything was fine would somehow make it so. But Sophia knew better. They had no idea that this dinner would mark the moment when everything changed. As they fumbled through small talk, Sophia remained silent, letting them speak first. They asked her how work was, how life was treating her. It was all surface level, the type of conversation they had when they didn't want to dig any deeper. She could see the worry in their eyes, because they knew something was off, but they couldn't put their finger on it. This wasn't the same girl they had known. She had changed. And they would find out just how much, and just how little they knew her. Sophia, her father finally said, his voice tinged with nervousness, we're really in a tough spot here. You know we wouldn't ask if we didn't have to, but he trailed off, and for a brief moment, he looked at his wife for support, but she offered nothing. Diane's eyes were wide, her lips tight, clearly unsure of how to navigate the conversation. Sophia let them continue, her gaze steady, calm. We've run into some financial problems, and we're really desperate, her father said, his voice cracking. The business, the house, we don't know what to do. His words hung in the air like a weight, but Sophia didn't flinch. Instead, she slowly placed her hand on the table, her fingers brushing the edge of the wine glass as she looked at her father and then her mother. I can help, she said softly. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had worked for. They didn't know what she had been quietly building all these years, the silent investments, the time spent learning the ropes of the financial world. They didn't know that she had been quietly making millions, not just to prove them wrong, but to show herself that she was more than they ever thought she could be. Her father blinked in surprise, but then his expression changed. He leaned forward, eyes wide with disbelief. What do you mean, help? He asked, his voice rising in pitch. Diane looked at Sophia, her eyebrows furrowing as she tried to make sense of the situation. I mean, Sophia began slowly, savoring the moment, I've got the $9 million you need. It's all here. I can transfer it to you. Right now. You can save the business, the house, whatever it is you need. She let the silence hang in the air for a moment, watching as her parents processed the words. Gerald blinked, his face turning pale. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Diane, on the other hand, looked at her daughter with a mix of disbelief and confusion. How, was all she could manage to say. Sophia gave them a long look, her heart beating steadily in her chest. She could feel the power in the room shifting, but she remained calm. I built it. On my own, she replied, her voice steady, without any hint of arrogance. I made the investments. I put in the work and now, it's mine. The words felt surreal, even to Sophia. She had never imagined that one day, she would be the one holding all the cards, the one with the power to change everything. Her parents had always seen her as the failure, the one who would never amount to anything. And yet, here she was, sitting across from them, the one in control. For a moment, her parents said nothing, their mouths open as they processed the information. The shock was evident on their faces, and Sophia could see the shame in their eyes. She could almost hear the voices in their heads, asterisk, how could we have been so blind? How could we have dismissed her all those years, asterisk. Gerald finally cleared his throat, his voice trembling. Sophia, this is unbelievable. He stopped himself, unable to finish the sentence. Diane, too, seemed lost for words. They had never seen this side of her, never imagined that their daughter, the one they had written off, could be the one to save them. But as the reality set in, the weight of it all hit them. They needed her. They were no longer the ones in control. She was. Sophia took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. I'll help you, she said, her voice strong, unshakable. But on my terms. You'll pay me back. But you'll follow my rules. No more control. No more secrets. You'll do things my way now. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a silence full of regret, of realization, of a life-changing shift in power. Finally, her father spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. We'll do whatever you say. The power had shifted, and they knew it. They had no choice but to accept it. But Sophia wasn't just doing this to help them. She was doing it to reclaim her place in the world, to show them, and herself, that she was worthy of respect, of admiration, of everything she had worked for. She had been the one dismissed, the one left behind. Now, she was the one in charge. And she would make sure they knew it. I had never seen my parents so vulnerable. The usual confident, almost arrogant air they carried had evaporated, leaving them like two strangers, unsure and timid. They had no idea what to say, but I could feel their desperation as they glanced at each other, then back at me. For a moment, there was only silence. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the faint sound of silverware clinking from the next table over. But this silence wasn't comforting, it was heavy, thick with regret and realization. The roles had completely shifted. I was no longer the one asking for help. I was the one in control. I couldn't help but let a small smile play at the corners of my lips. It wasn't smugness. It wasn't revenge. It was relief. After years of being told I wasn't enough, that I would never succeed, here I was, my parents were now the ones in need, and I was the one who could offer them the lifeline they had denied me. But I wasn't about to make this easy. I had learned too many lessons the hard way to simply forgive and forget. I'll help, I said slowly, my voice calm and measured. But you need to understand something first. I'm not just doing this out of the goodness of my heart. They nodded eagerly, their faces full of expectation. I've worked for every penny of this, I continued. You didn't believe in me when I needed you the most. You told me I would never amount to anything. You told me I was a failure. And now you come to me, expecting me to fix everything for you. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. I'm not done, I said, my voice steady. I'll help you, but I won't do it on your terms. I'll do it on mine. I'm not the little girl you pushed aside anymore. I'm not the one begging for your approval. There was a long pause, and then my father, Gerald, shifted in his seat. His usual authoritative demeanor had completely disappeared. He looked smaller now, more fragile. What do you want from us? He asked, his voice quiet. I could see the shame on his face, the realization of what he had lost. I didn't want an apology. That would never be enough. I had learned long ago that words were hollow. Action, that was what mattered. I want you to stop treating me like I'm less than, I said. I want you to see me for who I am, not who you wanted me to be. I want you to understand that I've built this on my own, and I'm not asking for your permission to succeed anymore. My mother's eyes welled up with tears, but I couldn't let that sway me. I wasn't here to make them feel better. I was here to set the record straight. You've always wanted me to be like Ethan, I continued, my voice rising just slightly, the perfect child, the one who never made mistakes. But I'm not him. And I never will be. My father flinched at the mention of Ethan's name. Ethan had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. He was everything my parents had wanted, charming, successful, and a constant source of pride. But he wasn't the one who had fought tooth and nail to make it on her own. That was me. And now, I have something you need, I added. But you'll need to earn it. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. I could see the conflict in their eyes, the struggle between their pride and their desperation. They didn't want to admit that they needed me, but it was clear that they had no other option. What do you want from us? My mother asked, her voice shaking. Tell us what we need to do. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of my words settle between us. First, I said slowly, you'll stop treating me like I'm invisible. You'll stop pretending I'm not good enough. You'll stop comparing me to Ethan. I want you to respect me for who I am, not for who you want me to be. We never meant to treat you that way, my father muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. I wasn't sure if he truly meant it, or if he was simply trying to avoid the uncomfortable truth. I know you didn't, I replied softly, but that doesn't change the fact that it happened. And I won't let you forget it. We understand, my mother said, her voice barely a whisper. I could tell that this was hard for them, but it wasn't my job to make it easier. I had spent too many years letting them dictate my worth, and now it was time to take control. Secondly, I continued, you will respect my terms. I'll help you out of this mess, but you'll do it my way. You will no longer have the right to call the shots. You'll follow my lead, just like I had to follow yours for all those years. They didn't argue. They couldn't. The power had shifted. They were at my mercy, and they knew it. And lastly, I added, I want you to remember this moment. Remember the girl you thought would never succeed. Remember the daughter you pushed away. Because when I save you, it won't be for you. It will be for me. This is my victory, not yours. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged a glance, but they didn't argue. They couldn't. They had no choice but to accept what I had said. I had finally taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about showing them that I was strong enough to stand on my own, to succeed without their help, and to finally earn the respect I had always deserved. The next few days were a blur, but in the best way possible. I spent the entire weekend at my desk, surrounded by financial statements, contracts, and spreadsheets. This was my world now, control, power, and the quiet thrill of knowing I was the one holding the strings. My parents had no idea how much they had underestimated me, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was that I was in charge. I was no longer the daughter they ignored. I was the one who would save them, but not without making them earn it. I spent hours fine-tuning the terms of their agreement, deciding how I would structure everything. It wasn't just about handing over the money. No, that would be too easy. I had to ensure that they understood the lesson behind it. I wanted them to know that I had earned my place at the table, and that this would be a constant reminder of the respect they owed me. On Monday, I called them. Meet me at the office, I told my father. His voice crackled through the phone, nervous but obedient. Of course. We'll be there. What time? 4 o'clock, I said. Don't be late. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. I didn't wait for a response. I knew they would be there. When they arrived, my father looked even more frazzled than usual, his tie crooked and his face pale. Diane, too, seemed on edge, trying to hold it together but failing miserably. I could tell that they didn't know what to expect, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing what was coming. I greeted them with a smile, but it wasn't a friendly one. It was the smile of someone who had all the power in the room. Have a seat, I said, motioning to the chairs across from my desk. They sat down, waiting for me to speak. I've been thinking about your situation, I said, leaning back in my chair. And I've decided I'll help you. But on my terms. They nodded eagerly, desperate for the lifeline. I could see the hope in their eyes, but I wasn't going to let them off the hook that easily. I'll provide the $9 million you need, I continued, watching them both closely. But first, you have to agree to a few conditions. Anything, Sophia, my father said, his voice trembling. Whatever you need, we'll do it. Diane nodded in agreement, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and gratitude. First, I said, you will acknowledge everything you've done wrong. You will admit that you treated me like I was less than, like I didn't matter. You will acknowledge that I was never given the same support that Ethan received, that I was always the afterthought. The room fell silent. My father looked at Diane, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Neither of them said anything, and for a moment, I almost felt bad for them. But then I remembered all the years I had spent fighting for their approval, only to be dismissed. No, this was about power. And they needed to understand that. We didn't mean to, Diane began, but I raised my hand to stop her. I don't want an apology. I want you to acknowledge the truth. You will never understand what it feels like to be dismissed, to be told that you're not good enough just because you're not what they expect. But you'll start by admitting it. To me. To yourselves. They both nodded, almost in unison, their faces flushed with shame. Second, I said, you will stop hiding behind your pride. No more pretending that everything is fine, no more acting like you have it all figured out. If you want my help, you will be honest with me. You will tell me exactly how bad things are, and you will trust that I can help you. No more lies. No more excuses. We won't lie to you anymore, my father said, his voice quieter now. We promise. Good, I replied, my tone sharp. Lastly, you will agree to the terms of repayment. This isn't a gift. This is a loan. You will pay me back with interest, and you will do so on time. There will be no delays. No more excuses. You will owe me, and you will make it right. They looked at each other, and then back at me, uncertainty still in their eyes. We can do that, Diane said finally, her voice more confident now. We will do whatever it takes. Good, I said, standing up from my chair and walking around the desk to stand in front of them. Now, here's the deal. You will sign this agreement, and I will transfer the money to your account. But you need to understand that this is a one-time offer. If you fail to uphold your end of the bargain, the consequences will be severe. I won't hesitate to pull the funds, and you'll be on your own. My father and Diane nodded again, this time without hesitation. We understand, my father said, and I could see the fear in his eyes. We won't fail you. I slid the contract across the table to them, and they both picked it up without a second thought, signing it quickly. The deal was sealed. I watched them sign, and for the first time in my life, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I had finally taken control. The power was mine now, and nothing would ever be the same. As they left the office, I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of it all sink in. I had done it. I had proven that I was capable of more than they could have ever imagined. I was no longer the girl they pushed aside. I was the one they needed. And that felt better than any apology they could have ever given me. The following week, I kept my distance from my parents, not because I was angry, but because I wanted to make sure they understood the gravity of the situation. They had been so used to having control over me, over everything, but now the tables had turned. They needed me, not the other way around. I didn't call them, didn't check in. It was time for them to sit with the reality that I wasn't just offering help out of kindness. I was offering it because they had no choice. It was Thursday afternoon when I got the call. My father's name flashed on my phone, and I knew it was time. I picked up without hesitation. Sophia, my father's voice came through, shaky. The money, it's all in place, but there's a meeting with the board tomorrow, and they're asking questions. We need your help. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping on the desk as I processed his words. It was exactly what I expected. Now that they had the money, the real test was whether or not they could manage it. They didn't know what to do with the power I had given them. I'm not going to solve all your problems for you, I replied, my tone firm. You'll get through this, but only if you follow the plan I laid out. You wanted to be in charge again, so prove that you can handle it. My father was silent for a moment, but then he spoke, his voice lower now. We can't do this without you. We need you, Sophia. Those words were the acknowledgement I had been waiting for. They weren't just asking for money anymore. They were asking for my expertise, my guidance. For a moment I considered going to the meeting, but I quickly reminded myself that I had already done my part. It was time for them to step up. I'm not going to be your crutch, I said, my voice unwavering. You want to prove yourself? Then do it. Show me that you can take it from here. The line went quiet. I could hear the faint sound of my father's breath, the weight of my words sinking in. All right, he said finally. We'll handle it. We'll follow the plan. I knew that this was their last chance. They had pushed me away for years, but now they had the opportunity to make it right. The next morning, I met with my lawyer to ensure everything was in place. I wasn't about to let them ruin this chance. As much as I wanted to help them, I knew that they had to do the hard work. The money I had provided wasn't just a solution, it was a test. They had to prove that they could handle it, that they could make the right decisions. By 2 p.m., my phone buzzed again. It was my mother this time. Sophia, we need to talk, she said, her voice soft and hesitant. The board, they want to meet with you. I told you, I said calmly, I'm not going to babysit you through this. You're in charge now. If you want to meet with me, you better have a plan to present. There was silence on the other end of the line, but then my mother spoke, almost inaudibly. We've been talking, your father and we realize how much we've wronged you. How we've always underestimated you, always treated you like you weren't enough. We're sorry, Sophia. Truly. I could hear the genuine remorse in her voice, but I wasn't about to let it sway me. This wasn't about an apology, it was about proving that they could stand on their own. I don't need your apology, I replied firmly. I need you to show me that you can do this without me. If you can't, then I'm done. The line went quiet for a moment, and I could almost feel the weight of their realization. They had spent years neglecting me, dismissing my worth, and now they were being given the chance to prove themselves. It wasn't just about money, it was about redemption. About showing me that they could rise above their mistakes. We'll make it. Right, my mother said, her voice stronger now. We'll follow your plan. Good, I replied. I'll be watching. After hanging up, I felt a strange sense of peace. The power had shifted, and I wasn't the one left in the shadows anymore. It wasn't just about the money, I had built something bigger than that. I had built a life where I was in control, where I didn't need to beg for approval or validation. My parents had finally seen what I was capable of, but it wasn't enough for them to just apologize. They had to prove it. And if they failed, there would be no turning back. The following days were filled with updates and calls from my parents, but I kept my distance. I wasn't going to make it easy for them. They had to earn their way back into my life, just like they had to earn my respect. As the board meeting came and went, I received a final call from my father. "We did it," he said, his voice full of disbelief. "We made the right decisions. The business is on track. We'll be able to repay you in full." I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just the money, it was the fact that they had done it. They had made the right choices. They had proven that they could stand on their own. And that meant more to me than anything. "Good," I said simply. "But don't forget this moment. Don't forget what you had to go through to get here. And remember, I did this for me, not for you." With that, I hung up, feeling a sense of finality. I had helped them, yes, but I had also helped myself. I had shown them that I was not just the person they had underestimated. I was the person who had made it happen. And that was something they could never take away from me. Weeks went by, and I watched my parents try to navigate their new reality, the one where they had to follow my lead. The tension that had once defined our family dynamics was still there, lingering like smoke, but it was different now. They weren't the ones in control anymore. I was. The business had stabilized, but I wasn't about to let them forget what they had put me through. They had learned the hard way that I wasn't someone to be underestimated. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had proven that I was more than capable. And yet, every time I spoke to them, there was a small part of me that wondered if they truly understood the magnitude of what had happened. Did they really get it? Did they realize that the power they had always held over me was gone, never to return? I didn't ask. I didn't need to. But I couldn't help but wonder. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back meetings, I sat in my apartment scrolling through emails when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I hesitated before answering. "Sophia," her voice came through, softer than I was used to. "We've been thinking about everything." I waited, not sure what she was going to say. "We know we made a lot of mistakes," she continued. "And we're sorry. We want to make things right, but we know it will take time." I let her words sink in. The apology was long overdue, but hearing it now didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe it was because I had already moved on. "It's not just about saying sorry," I replied, my voice calm. "It's about showing me that you mean it. That you're willing to put in the effort to make things right." There was silence on the other end of the line before she spoke again. "We will," she said. "We promise. We're trying, Sophia. We really are." I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see it. "I know you are," I said softly. "But don't expect me to just forget. You'll have to earn my trust, piece by piece." She sighed. "I understand. We'll do whatever it takes." And just like that, something shifted. I had never expected a full apology, never needed one. But hearing her voice, filled with a mixture of guilt and determination, made me realize that perhaps they were finally starting to understand. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. They had to work for it, just like I had worked for everything I had. Just like I had worked to make them see me for who I was. The next few months were a series of small steps. They started respecting my boundaries more. They stopped undermining my decisions, stopped comparing me to Ethan. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but things were slowly improving. One Saturday afternoon, a few months later, I sat down with them for lunch. It was the first time in a long while that we had spent time together without the weight of past mistakes hanging over us. As we ate, I could sense a change. My father actually listened to me when I spoke, taking my opinions seriously for the first time in years. My mother, too, seemed to finally be seeing me as an equal, not as the failure they had once dismissed. It wasn't a magical transformation, but it was progress. I hadn't expected anything to change overnight. I didn't expect them to suddenly become the perfect parents. But I had always wanted them to see me as more than just the daughter they had ignored. I wanted them to see my strength, my resilience. And slowly, they were starting to. After that lunch, we went for a walk in the park. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. As we walked, my father turned to me, his voice steady but sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he said, his hands in his pockets. "About earning your trust. And I know it's going to take time. But I want you to know that I'm trying. And I hope you can see that." I nodded, my gaze ahead, watching the children play on the swings. "I do," I said quietly. "But you can't expect me to just forget the past. You'll have to prove that you've changed, that you're not the same people who pushed me away all those years." He looked down for a moment, as if weighing his words. "We're not the same people," he said softly. "And we won't ever be, not after everything that's happened. But we want to make it right. We want to be a family again." I didn't say anything at first, just let his words hang in the air. I wasn't sure if I fully believed them, but there was something in his voice that told me he meant it. Maybe it wasn't enough yet. Maybe it would take years to fully heal the wounds that had been inflicted. But it was a start. And that was more than I had ever expected from them. As we continued walking, I realized that I wasn't the same person I had been either. I had been broken, yes, but I had also become stronger because of it. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to their approval, to their expectations. I had built my own life, my own success. And I was finally free from the need to prove anything to anyone. We didn't need to go back to the way things were. We could build something new, something better. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward together, not as the family we once were, but as the family we could be. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had already proved everything I needed to prove. The rest, I realized, was just a bonus. Months passed and things with my parents slowly began to shift. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, and I didn't expect it to be. Healing takes time, and so does trust. But I could feel the change, little by little, like a slow current in the river. They respected my space more, asked for my advice when it came to decisions that mattered, and most importantly, stopped trying to control everything. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One evening, my father invited me to dinner. It had been a while since we'd spent time together without the weight of past mistakes hanging in the air. I wasn't sure what he wanted to talk about, but I agreed to go. When I arrived at the restaurant, my parents were already there, sitting at a quiet corner table. My father smiled when he saw me, but there was something in his expression, something different. "Sophia," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. And I wanted to tell you something." I sat down across from them, watching as he took a deep breath, as though gathering his thoughts. Diane, too, looked at me with a quiet kind of nervousness in her eyes. "What is it?" I asked, my voice calm but curious. My father looked at Diane before turning back to me. "We've been looking at the business and, well, we want to offer you something." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What do you mean?" I asked. "We've been talking," Diane added, "and we know that we haven't always supported you the way we should have. We've realized that you've been doing things on your own for so long, that you've built something incredible without us. And we want to acknowledge that." My father nodded. "We want to offer you a role. A real role. You've proven that you're capable, that you know what you're doing. And we want you to help us lead the company." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had expected them to apologize, maybe offer me some money, but this was different. This was an offer of power. An offer to finally be seen as an equal, not as someone who had to prove themselves at every turn. "A role," I repeated, still processing. "Yes," my father said, his voice steady now. We want you to be a part of the leadership team. We've seen how much you've done for us, for the business. And we know you're the one who can take it to the next level. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just an apology anymore. It was recognition. It was validation. But it wasn't just about the offer, it was about what it represented. They were finally seeing me for who I truly was. Not the failure they had once dismissed, but the woman who had built her own empire. The woman who had turned their world around without their help. I appreciate the offer, I said slowly, my mind racing, but why now? Because we've seen the way you've built your life, Diane said quietly. We've seen how much you've done without us. And we've come to realize that we need you, Sophia. Not just for the business, but because we need you in our lives. There was something raw in her voice, something I hadn't heard before. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was something else, but I could hear it, she meant it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like she wasn't just apologizing. She was acknowledging everything I had done. I took a deep breath. I had fought so hard to get to this point, to prove to myself and to them that I was capable. But now the question wasn't whether or not I could handle the responsibility. The question was, did I want to? I've worked hard to get here, I said slowly. And I've learned a lot. But I don't know if I'm ready to step into something like that with you too. I've spent so long doing this on my own. It's not just about the company. It's about everything we've been through. My father nodded, understanding. We get that, he said. But we're ready to work with you. Not as the daughter we pushed aside, but as the woman who knows what she's doing. We're not asking you to forgive us overnight. We're asking you to give us a chance to prove we can be a part of your life. I sat there for a moment, weighing the offer. It wasn't just a job. It was a chance to finally take control, to work with them on my own terms. To show them, and myself, that I could be part of something bigger than just my own success. All right, I said finally, but I'm doing this on my terms. We're going to take this slow. I won't be pushed into anything. And I need to know that you're ready to be on the same level as me, not above me. They both nodded eagerly. We're ready, my father said. We'll do whatever it takes. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't the end of all the years of resentment and struggle. But it was a start. It was the beginning of something new. I had taken control of my life, and now, it seemed, I was ready to take control of this next chapter too. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about finally being seen, being recognized for everything I had worked for. And as I sat there with my parents, I realized that the power I had earned wasn't just in the money, or the position, or the deal, it was in the fact that I had the strength to make my own choices, to carve my own path, and to let them walk alongside me, not above me. And that was more than enough. It had been a few months since I made the decision to step into the business with my parents, and while the dynamics between us had improved, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. I had always kept my guard up, but now it felt like a tightrope walk, balancing the fine line between being involved and still maintaining my independence. My parents were trying, but there were moments when I could see the old habits creeping back in, the same ones that had pushed me away for so long. I was no longer just the daughter who had to prove herself. I was now a part of the team, expected to make decisions that would affect the future of the company. But as much as they needed me, I couldn't ignore the sense of distance that remained. We weren't a perfect family. We were never going to be. But something had changed in me. I had become more than just a daughter. I had become someone who knew her worth. It was late one evening when I received a call from my father, his voice unusually urgent. Sophia, we need to talk, he said. There's been a situation with one of our investments, and it's bigger than we thought. My stomach tightened. The company's finances had been steady, but I knew all too well how quickly things could spiral. What happened? I asked, trying to stay calm. It's a deal we made a few months ago, he explained. One of the partners is trying to back out, and if they do, we stand to lose everything. We need you here tomorrow to help us figure this out. I paused, running my fingers through my hair. I had spent years building my own financial empire, but this was different. This wasn't just about making money, it was about the future of the business my parents had spent their lives building. I'll be there, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The next morning, I met with them in the conference room. The tension in the air was thick. My father was pacing, his brow furrowed with concern. Diane was sitting at the table, tapping her fingers nervously. We've tried everything, my father said, stopping in front of me. But this guy is playing hardball. We don't have the leverage we thought we did. I could see the panic in his eyes. This wasn't the calm, collected man I had known growing up. This was a man who was desperate, a man who had forgotten what it felt like to fight for control. I took a deep breath and sat down, scanning the documents in front of me. You've been trying to reason with him, right? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Of course, my father replied, rubbing his forehead. But he's not budging. Well, then it's time we play hardball, I said, my voice firm. My parents exchanged a look, clearly surprised by my response. I had always been the quiet one, the one who kept to the sidelines. But now, I was stepping into the role they had never expected me to take. We're not giving up this deal, I continued. And we're not going to let him dictate the terms. We're going to turn this around. The plan was simple, but it required every ounce of strength I had. We would offer him something he couldn't refuse, financial backing in exchange for more control, more equity, and more say in future decisions. But it wouldn't be easy. I had to negotiate from a position of power, something I had never done before with my parents. They had always been the ones making the decisions. They had always been the ones in control. But now, I was the one calling the shots. The meeting with the partner was scheduled for the following afternoon. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my suit jacket, I felt a wave of nerves wash over me. I had spent years proving my worth to my parents. But now, I was about to prove it to someone who didn't know me, someone who only saw me as another player in the game. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a businesswoman. When we arrived at the office of the partner, I could feel the tension in the room. The man sitting across from us was older, sharp-eyed, with a demeanor that screamed authority. He didn't shake my hand. He barely acknowledged my presence. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I could feel the weight of the moment. We've come to discuss the terms of the deal, I said, my voice steady, despite the nervousness bubbling in my chest. We're willing to offer you the financial backing you need, but there will be conditions. We won't accept being pushed around. He raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. I could see the flicker of respect in his eyes, but I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of knowing I had him on the ropes. What kind of conditions? He asked, his tone skeptical. We're not interested in a deal that leaves us with nothing, I said, holding his gaze. You want our money, but you need us just as much. We want more control, more influence, and more equity. If you can't accept that, then we'll walk away. For a moment, there was silence. The partner stared at me, sizing me up. I could feel the power shift in the room. He wasn't the one holding the cards anymore. I was. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. You've got guts, he said. I'll give you that. He paused for a moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. All right, he said finally. You've got a deal. The words hit me like a flood of relief, but I didn't show it. I remained calm, professional. Good, I said. We'll have the contract drawn up, and we expect everything to be finalized by next week. As we left the office, my parents turned to me with a mix of admiration and disbelief. I don't know how you did it, my father said, his voice full of awe. You saved us. I didn't save anyone, I replied, my voice steady. We did this together. But now, you know what it feels like to truly earn your place. I could see the pride in their eyes. It wasn't just about the deal. It was about the respect I had earned, not just from them, but from myself. I had finally proven that I was capable of anything. And that was more than enough. Months passed, and the business continued to thrive. The partnership I had secured was proving to be everything we needed, and more. My parents were learning to work alongside me, not as authority figures but as partners. There were still moments of tension, old habits die hard, but they were trying. And I could see it. I could feel the shift. We were no longer just a family trying to survive. We were a team, working together towards something greater. But even as things were going well, there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. It wasn't about the business anymore. It was about the lingering question I had been asking myself for months. Had they really changed? Were they finally seeing me for who I was, or was this just another chapter in the same old story? I wasn't sure. I had come so far from the girl who begged for their approval. I had built my own empire, made my own decisions, and taken control of my own life. And yet, there was this lingering part of me that wondered if I would always be their little girl, the one they overlooked, the one they didn't understand. It wasn't until one evening, sitting in the office late, that I realized what was missing. I was going through the quarterly reports when I saw it. Something wasn't right. There was a gap in the numbers, something that didn't add up. I had become accustomed to reading between the lines, to noticing when something was off. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, my mind racing. I couldn't ignore it. I had to confront it. The next morning, I called a meeting with my parents. They were already at the office when I arrived, sitting in the conference room, waiting for me. I didn't waste any time. There's something wrong with the numbers, I said, placing the report on the table in front of them. I need to know what happened. My father looked up, his face pale. What do you mean? He asked, his voice suddenly defensive. I didn't flinch. I've gone over everything, I said calmly. And there's a discrepancy in the financials. Someone's hiding something. I need to know what's going on. My mother shifted in her seat, her eyes avoiding mine. For a moment, there was silence. And then my father spoke, his voice tight. We didn't want to worry you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There have been some setbacks. Some things we didn't know how to handle. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. What kind of setbacks? I asked. My father's gaze dropped to the table, and I could see the shame in his eyes. We made a bad investment. A risky one. And it didn't pay off. We tried to cover it up, but the losses were too much. The words hit me like a blow. All the progress, all the effort we had put into turning the business around, and now this. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Why didn't you bring me in sooner? My mother finally looked up, her face filled with regret. We were afraid, she said softly. We didn't want to burden you with it. You've already done so much for us. We didn't want to disappoint you. I stared at her, my heart heavy. Disappointment. That word had followed me for so long, and now, here they were, admitting they were afraid of disappointing me. It was hard to reconcile the feeling with the anger I had been holding onto for so long. You've already disappointed me, I said, my voice low. But it's not about the money. It's about the trust. You didn't trust me enough to be honest with me. You didn't trust me enough to bring me in when things started to go wrong. The room was silent. My parents sat there, looking at me, and I could see the guilt in their eyes. But it didn't matter. It was too late for apologies. I had worked too hard to build something for myself, something I could be proud of, and now I was finding out that they had kept secrets from me. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about the foundation of our relationship. I can help you, I said, breaking the silence. But I need you to be honest with me. I need you to trust me. If we're going to keep this business going, we do it together. No more secrets. No more hiding things. My father nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and shame. We'll do that, he said quietly. We'll do it together. I looked at them both, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the potential for something real. Something that wasn't just about business or money. It was about rebuilding what had been broken, about learning to trust each other again. And maybe, just maybe, this time, it would be different. We weren't going to fix everything overnight. I knew that. But we could start fresh. We could start with honesty. And that was more than I had ever hoped for. As we worked through the issues with the investment, I could see my parents beginning to change. They were still learning, still growing, but they were doing it with me, not for me. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of frustration, but we kept going. We were finally doing it together. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just a part of the family. I was an equal. I wasn't the one trying to prove myself anymore. I had already done that. Now it was about building something real, something that could last. And this time, I was doing it on my own terms. It had been a few weeks since the last meeting with my parents, and I had begun to notice a subtle shift in the air between us. Things were better, not perfect but better. We were starting to work together in a way that felt more genuine, more like a partnership than a parent-child relationship. The business was on track, and for once, the future seemed less uncertain. My father had started taking my advice more seriously, and even Diane, though still cautious, was beginning to see me as an equal rather than someone who needed to be managed. I was no longer the daughter they kept at arm's length. But despite all the progress, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still walking on eggshells with them. The past was never far behind, and no matter how much I had proven myself, there were days when I felt like a stranger in my own family. I had worked so hard to build my own life, my own independence, and I couldn't afford to let that slip away. I couldn't afford to go back to the way things used to be. It was a Wednesday morning when I received another call from my father. He sounded almost too calm, which always made me nervous. Sophia, he said, I need you to come to the office. There's something we need to discuss. My heart skipped a beat. I had learned to trust my instincts, and something about his tone made me uneasy. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing to worry about, he reassured me, though his voice betrayed a hint of anxiety. Just come when you can. I didn't like the sound of that, but I agreed. When I arrived at the office, I found my parents sitting at the conference table, papers spread out in front of them. My father looked unusually tense, his fingers tapping nervously on the surface. Diane, too, had a worried expression, her hands folded neatly in front of her. What's going on? I asked, taking a seat across from them. My father looked at me, hesitated for a moment, and then spoke. There's been a new development. One of our major investors has backed out, and it's affecting our next big project. We've been trying to cover it up, but it's becoming more obvious. The words hit me hard, but I kept my composure. We had just turned things around. We couldn't afford another setback. How bad is it? I asked, my voice calm, despite the rush of panic in my chest. Bad enough that if we don't act quickly, we might lose everything we've worked for, Diane said, her voice quiet but urgent. We need to find a solution, and we need it fast. I could see the weight of the situation in their eyes. They were trying to maintain control, but it was clear that they were overwhelmed. This wasn't just a financial issue, it was a test of everything we had worked for. I took a deep breath, allowing myself a moment of clarity before responding. All right, I said, leaning forward. We'll figure this out, but I need to know everything. No more hiding things from me. If we're going to save this, we need a plan that covers every angle. They nodded in agreement, and we spent the next few hours going through every detail of the situation. The numbers didn't lie. This was going to be tough but not impossible. We had the resources, the knowledge, and the drive to make it work. I wasn't about to let all the progress we had made fall apart. We needed a strategy that was aggressive, calculated, and, most importantly, fast. As we discussed the options, I could see my father looking at me differently. He wasn't just seeing me as the daughter anymore. He was seeing me as a partner, someone who could help guide them through this. It wasn't just the business that was on the line now. It was our relationship. It was my place in the family, and this time, I wasn't going to let them take it away from me. By the time we had a plan in place, it was late in the afternoon. We had come up with a series of moves that would allow us to salvage the project, but it would require quick action and precise execution. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. It never was. But we had one advantage, our ability to work together, even if we didn't always see eye to eye. I looked at my parents, their faces weary but determined. "We've got this," I said firmly. "But we do it together. No more secrets. No more hiding things from each other. We have to trust each other if we're going to make it through this." My father gave me a small, appreciative nod, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly on the same team. The next few days were a whirlwind. We worked tirelessly to implement the plan, contacting new investors, renegotiating deals, and making sure everything was in order. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. By the end of the week, we had secured the funding we needed, and the project was back on track. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best we could do under the circumstances. As we sat in the office, reviewing the final details, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was what I had been fighting for all along, not just the business, but the chance to prove that I was capable, that I was strong enough to handle whatever came my way. And as I looked at my parents, I realized that we weren't just rebuilding a business. We were rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always pretty, but we were finally on the same page. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. I wasn't just the daughter. I wasn't just the one they had overlooked. I was a part of something bigger, something that we had all built together. The days following our successful deal felt like a turning point, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unsettled. The business was back on track, and my parents had kept their word. They trusted me more, they treated me more like an equal. But something lingered in the back of my mind. It wasn't the business. It wasn't the money. It was the question I had been avoiding for so long: what did this really mean for us, for me? I had spent so many years trying to prove myself, trying to earn their approval, that I never stopped to think about what would happen when I finally got it. We were working together, yes, but it wasn't just the business that was at stake now. It was our relationship. My parents had come a long way, but the damage had been done. I had learned how to survive without them, how to succeed without their help. Now that we were on the same page, I had to ask myself, was it enough? Would it ever be enough? I was sitting at my desk one afternoon, reviewing some figures, when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I picked up the call, my heart suddenly racing. "Sophia," her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "We need to talk." I immediately felt a knot in my stomach. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Nothing's wrong," she replied quickly. "It's just, I've been thinking about everything, and I feel like we need to have an honest conversation." I took a deep breath. This was it. The conversation I had been putting off. "All right," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I'm listening." "I know we've made a lot of mistakes," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "And I know you've worked so hard to get to where you are. But I need you to understand that we didn't do it to hurt you. We didn't know how to help you then, and we made so many wrong choices. But we want to do better. We want to be a part of your life, really be a part of it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. The apology was long overdue, but it wasn't just about the words. It was about the sincerity behind them. For the first time in a long while, I felt like she was seeing me, really seeing me, for who I was, not just as their daughter, not just as someone to be fixed. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. "I know," I said quietly. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me. But it's not just about the past anymore. It's about moving forward, about creating something new." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing softly, the weight of the conversation pressing on both of us. "I want that too, Sophia," she said finally. "I want to be there for you, for us, not just as your parents but as people who respect what you've done. I know we have a long way to go, but I'm ready if you are." I closed my eyes for a moment, processing her words. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be fast. We had both built walls over the years, walls of hurt, of disappointment, of fear. But maybe, just maybe, those walls were starting to come down. "I'm ready," I said softly. "But it's going to take time. We need to rebuild trust, not just in the business but in each other. I'm not going to forget the past, but I'm willing to move forward. Together." My mother was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, I could hear the emotion in her voice. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for giving us this chance. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if we could truly rebuild everything that had been broken. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long had lightened. I didn't need my parents' approval to succeed anymore. I had already proven that. What I needed now was for us to be a family, not just in name but in reality. It wasn't just about business or money. It was about something deeper, something more lasting. It was about connection. The next few months passed in a blur of meetings, projects, and family dinners that no longer felt like obligations, but moments of real connection. There were still bumps in the road, still moments where the old habits resurfaced, but we worked through them. We communicated better, we respected each other's boundaries, and most importantly, we supported each other. One evening, as we sat together in the family room, laughing over a joke my father had made, I realized that this was the family I had always wanted. Not perfect, not without flaws, but real. And that was enough. I had fought so hard to prove myself to them, to everyone, that I forgot what it felt like to simply be accepted, to be loved, without conditions. But now, with everything we had been through, I understood. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I had already done that. The only thing left to do was to live. And for the first time, I wasn't doing it alone. It had been several months since I first stepped into the role with my parents, and while there were still moments of tension, it felt like we were finally finding our rhythm. The business was growing stronger, but more importantly, our relationship was growing in a way I hadn't anticipated. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking around with a weight on my shoulders. We were becoming something new, something better. But even with all the progress, there was still one lingering thought in my mind. Was I truly ready to let go of the past? Could I trust that this change, this new dynamic, would last? I had worked so hard to get to this point, to build my own life, to prove to myself that I didn't need anyone's validation. And now my parents were finally treating me like an equal, respecting my decisions, trusting my judgment. But there was always a part of me that wondered, if everything fell apart, if the business faltered again, would they revert back to the way they had been? Would they push me aside, just like they always had before? I couldn't ignore those doubts, no matter how hard I tried. I had spent years building walls around myself to protect my heart, and now, just when I was starting to let them down, I was faced with the fear that maybe it wasn't enough. I didn't know what to do with that fear, but I knew I couldn't keep ignoring it. So one evening, after another successful meeting with investors, I decided to take a step I hadn't planned on. I called my mother. It was late, but I had to do this. I needed to have this conversation, to finally confront the elephant in the room. "Mom," I said when she picked up, my voice steady despite the unease in my chest. "I think we need to talk." "Of course, sweetheart," she replied, her voice warm but tired. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. "It's about us," I began, my voice soft but firm. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, the business, our relationship, how things have changed. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to let go of the past. I don't know if I can fully trust that things won't go back to the way they were." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her taking a deep breath. "I understand," she said finally. "It's been a long road for all of us. We've hurt you, and I can't take that back. But I want you to know, from the bottom of my heart, that we're not going back to the way things were. I know we have a lot to prove, and it's going to take time. But I'm here, and I'm ready to prove to you that we can do this together." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had kept myself distant, not allowing myself to fully trust them. I had feared that if I let my guard down, they would disappoint me again. But now, hearing her speak with such sincerity, I felt the weight of my own walls crumbling. Maybe it wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about accepting it, acknowledging it, and moving forward with the understanding that we could still build something new. "I'm not asking you to forget," I said, my voice quieter now. "I'm just asking for the chance to move forward. To really move forward, without fear of being left behind again." "We'll give you that chance," my mother said softly. "I promise you, we're not going anywhere." That conversation, that promise, was the turning point I needed. For the first time, I truly believed that they were truly trying to make things right. It wasn't going to happen overnight, and I wasn't going to let my guard down completely. But I was ready to try to trust, to try to believe that things could be different. The next few weeks passed with a sense of newness, like we were all walking into uncharted territory together. There were still moments of hesitation, moments where old habits tried to creep back in, but we worked through them. We were learning to communicate in ways we never had before. We were learning to listen, to be honest, to put the work in. And slowly, the trust between us grew. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, as we sat down for dinner after another long day of work, my father looked at me, his eyes soft with appreciation. "Sophia," he said quietly, "I just want to thank you for everything. For giving us this chance." I looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "You don't have to thank me," I said, my heart swelling. "We're doing this together. That's what matters." And in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened, no matter what obstacles came our way, we had something stronger now. We had the ability to move forward, to build something lasting. We weren't just rebuilding a business. We were rebuilding our family, one step at a time. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider anymore. I felt like I belonged. I wasn't just the daughter. I wasn't just the one they had overlooked. I was part of something bigger. And that was enough. It had been a year since that pivotal conversation with my mother. A year since everything began to shift between us. The business was thriving, yes, but more than that, we were thriving as a family. There were still moments of doubt, moments where I wondered if we were truly free from the patterns of the past, but those moments became fewer and farther between. What surprised me the most was the quiet strength that had emerged between us. It wasn't loud or showy, but it was real. I could feel it in the way my father asked for my opinion during meetings, in the way my mother reached out to me, not just as a daughter but as a partner. We were building something more than just a company now. We were building trust, and with it, we were building a new kind of family, a family where we could be honest with each other, where we could support one another without fear of judgment or rejection. One evening, after a long day of work, I found myself sitting in the family room with my parents, just the three of us, laughing over something my father had said. It wasn't the perfect family dinner, but it was real. And for the first time, I felt at peace. I wasn't just a part of the business. I wasn't just a part of their world. I was part of something bigger than that, a real, imperfect family that could stand together through anything. The journey we had been on, the struggles we had faced, were not just about the business. They were about rediscovering each other, about finding our way back to each other despite all the years of hurt and distance. We had learned the hardest lessons of all, that love, respect, and trust aren't given freely but earned. And with that understanding, we had built something more valuable than any business deal or investment could ever be. Looking back, I realized that the greatest gift we had was not the success of the company, but the success of our relationship. We had come so far, not just as business partners, but as a family. And as I sat there, listening to the laughter echoing in the room, I understood that this was what it was all about. Family. Not perfect, but real. And that was enough. The story is more than just about business success or financial growth. It's a reminder that relationships, the ones that truly matter, take effort, vulnerability, and time. We are all flawed, and we all have our struggles, but that doesn't mean we can't find a way to rebuild, to grow, and to love. This story teaches us that even when things fall apart, even when trust is broken, there is always a chance to start again. It's about embracing our imperfections, learning to trust again, and most importantly, learning to forgive. Life is not about achieving perfection, but about finding peace in our shared humanity, in the understanding that we are all just doing the best we can. The real beauty of the journey lies not in the destination, but in the moments of connection we make along the way.